25th December. It is the third session of this hall in Orange City Literature Fest, and time for this session will be 1:30 p.m. to 2 p.m. This session is of 30 minutes. We will be now discussing about When I Wrote Unlikely Hero with Nandita Puri. Nandita Puri was born in Calcutta and spent her early childhood in boarding school in the former French colony of Chandranagar. She studied in Calcutta and Bombay, majoring in English literature, and worked as a writer and journalist with several newspapers like The Telegraph, The Statesman, The Times of India, The Reader Digest, and others. For nearly a decade, she wrote one of the most popularly weekly film column on cinema for Midday, Potpourri, and Indian largest circulated daily, Dainik Bhaskar Khas Chehre. However, her collection of short stories, 9 on 9, published by Rupa and Company in 2005, has been critically acclaimed and well received. It has gone into many editions and has also been translated in German in 2006 Frankfurt Book Fair. In 2010, Nandita published the biography Unlikely Hero, Om Puri, which has been on the bestsellers list and translated in several Indian languages, including Hindi, Malayalam, Punjabi, and Marathi. The following year, Nandita published her debut novel, Continents. In 2017, she launched the Om Puri Foundation at the 17th Cannes Films Festival in memory of her husband, internationally acclaimed actor Om Puri, to carry his legacy and philosophy ahead. Currently, she chairs the Om Puri Foundation. Nandita has been working and researching on the sensitive subject of international child trafficking and inter-country adoption since more than 3 years now through the personal story of Jennifer's Hands. The book Jennifer's is being published by Rupa Publications. And the moderator is Ms. Barkha Mathur. Barkha Mathur is a senior journalist working for English dailies in the city over 2 decades. Being a feature editor of Times of India, she has been covered the largest segment of the subject, which include trend, lifestyle, art, music, and culture. Her area of work has been demanded imaginative copies, which have been made big demands on her creative writing skill. From features of interview of celebrities and steering stories of big achievements or ordinary person have all been a part of her writing. She is also a columnist, blogger, and author, and the taught writing student of mass communication. She has also conducted workshops on creative writing and is popular panelist at literary events. Handing this session over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, all of you. I have with me here on stage Nandita Puri. She needs not much of an introduction, but anyway, she's the writer of the book Unlikely Hero, Om Puri. As a spouse, it's a very intimate description. When the book came out first in November 2009, it stirred a controversy. And much of the focus went on that controversy, and what got buried was the magnificent struggle, the heartbreaks, the hard work of a very remarkable actor of our times. The couple spent much of the time defending the controversies, fighting them, dispelling the myths, etc. Now it will be 2 years next month since Om Puri passed away. 3 years? 2017. Okay, 3 years, I'm sorry. So how's the book going now, ma'am?
Well, the book is actually doing very well, and it's gone into several Indian translations. And in fact, I had called the publishers to, have some books here. They were totally sold out. And even when I go to places like Prithvi Theatre and all, they always tell me, they tell my son, we need some more books. So book is doing very well, touch wood. At the end of the day, it's a story of one of the finest actors in the world. Not India, one of the finest in the world. So the story should stand out.
Sure. So whose idea was it to do this biography, yours or Mr. Om Puri's?
So during the shooting of City of Joy, this was in Calcutta, 1991, I think. So that was Omji's first international project, big project with Patrick Swayze, Roland Joffe film. So I was a cub reporter with the Telegraph. So, and I wanted to go and we all wanted to go and interview Patrick Swayze because he was fresh out of City of Dirty Dancing and Ghost. So my, senior editor said, no, please do Shabana Azmi and Om Puri. So I said, we were like very heart fallen. Okay, theek hai, we'll go and do. And those were pre-Google days. We didn't have Wikipedia. We didn't have Google. So I had to go to the archives. Of course, I was very familiar with his work. I had seen all his films and most of his films, and had enough question on both Shabana and Om. And then I called him, and then we went and I interviewed him, and my tape, we had those dictaphones those days, so my tape ran out, so I had to come another day, and that day I went with my photographer. So, we took the photographs and all, and he took a photograph of mine. And that's how the whole thing started off, He called me and said, you have to come and collect that photograph. So I went to collect. And he said, no, I'm keeping this, I'll give you another one. And he had framed me and framed it up and stuff like that. So that's how the romance went. And for me, I was a huge fan of Om Puri's, huge fan of the art cinema movement. Nasiruddin Shah, Shabana Azmi, Smita Patil, and Om Puri. So for me, it was like a fangirl moment. And then this whole thing. And then I think the Telegraph interview came out. It was in the Telegraph Sunday magazine. And it was, very, very popular. And it was entitled Omnipotent, I think. That's the copy editors doing it. So anyway, he said, after we started dating, he said, you know what? You must write a biography on me. Oh. Now, I was all of 21, cub reporter. Talking of Om Puri is not just talking about any small actor. You are Om Puri, Nasiruddin Shah, Shabana, Smita, they represented, they embodied a whole movement of parallel cinema, of art, some of the great cinemas of Benegal, Ray, Mrinal Sen. So for me, it was a huge task. Interviewing Om Puri, interviewing a Shabana Azmi was fine. But writing about the huge movement they represented and why people would read their story was another thing. So I said, no, I don't think this guy is just in love with me, so he's just telling me. Thank God I was sensible, and I said, no, I'm not going to write about it. And he kept on saying, no, you don't have to always, do about the film movement. Talk about my childhood. And he has an amazing childhood. And he said, my childhood is like Charlie Chaplin's childhood. I come from extreme, difficult, poverty-stricken background. It'll make you cry. I said, yeah, that is fine. But when I'm writing about Om Puri, apart from the childhood, it also has to be the body of work you represent. So I don't think I'm in a position to write. So it took me at least 12, 13, 14 years for me to actually decide, okay, I am capable. When my publishers came to me and said, we have a series.
During this time, you got married to Mr.
Yes, we got married, we traveled, I watched, traveled all over the world. He was doing a lot of films in England and US. He was working with Jack Nicholson, Tom Hanks, Mike Nichols, Michael Douglas. So it was a Western exposure as well as Shyam Benegal, David Dhawan, Priyadarshan, the whole lot of the Indian. And I also was, Satyajit Ray. But by the time we got married, he had passed away. So, but the directors I witnessed. And what happened was, I started writing a column for the Midday called The Potpourri. It was a weekly column on cinema. And it would not just be reviews, it was overviews, it was talking about aspects of cinema, actors, location shots and all, because Midday thought this woman is traveling all over the world, so we'll get free report. We don't have to pay her, So, and I enjoyed it. It was a very popular column. For 8 years, I wrote, without missing a deadline. So by that time, and I had nothing to do with Hindi films when I married Mr. Puri. But after I started actually writing the column, the confidence grew in terms of knowing cinema. Actually, Omji never liked putting art cinema and commercial. Cinema is good or bad. You enjoy it or you don't. But anyway, we do have our own little this thing. So that's how I started writing. And around 12, 13, 14 years later, I think the publishers got in touch with me and said, we want to do a book. And since you're a journalist, you write on cinema, why don't you write on your husband? So they had a series called Family Pride. and I read a couple of the family pride, where the sons write about the father, or the, daughters write about their mother, famous. I'm not mentioning them. And, and I said, sorry, I can't do this. It's by the grace of God. My father did this, and by the grace of the Almighty. I said, hello, I'm a journalist, and we're covering a very important personality, because till then nobody had written about these four stalwart actors of Indian cinema. I said, when I'm writing about Om Puri, I'm representing a whole body of work. So I don't think, I can do a kind of a family thing where it's all praise, praise, praise. And that was perhaps one of the reasons I resisted writing on Omji, immediately after we met, because I was not an established writer. I didn't have a publisher. So who would sponsor my book would be Mr. Puri. And what would happen? He would say, now you write this, now you write that. This is good, that is bad. Being a journalist, it goes against my grain. So I said, okay, now I'm writing a book on you.
Right.
So that's
a very nice story, very promising for the fraternity, young girls. You don't only get to interview an actor, you get to marry him also, if you play it right.
Yes, it is kind of a fairy tale, one of those fairy tale stories, yeah.
Okay. So when you heard these very heartbreaking stories of despair, hopelessness, how did you feel? Because you were married to that man by now, and he was a huge actor also.
Yeah, I've always had this huge fangirl moment, and then I started realizing I'm living with this man who was like a very, normal man with anger, with emotions and everything. And when you hear some of his stories, especially at the age of 6, he started working in a tea stall. But he never capitalized on it like certain politicians do. He was cleaning bartan in a tea stall in Punjab because he was contributing to putting food on the table. And a 6-year-old boy was so sleepy that at times he would take all the bartan, put it inside, and he was chucked out of his job because he didn't do his job well. And then he started giving tuitions when he was 14, 15. He was a very good student. He worked under extremely difficult circumstances. I remember Mr. Benegal, Mr. Shyam Benegal, who was like a mentor and father, and he's very, very close to us, saying, Nandita, I met Om when he was talking about, in fact, the title Unlikely Hero is given by Mr. Benegal, because he said he's the most unlikely hero we have. So he said, I knew Om. The time he didn't know where his next meal was coming or whether the next meal was coming at all. So those were the days. And probably when I met him, he was very successful. He was, we were traveling to all these Hollywood films, and he was a big name and with all the awards. So I didn't realize the poverty. But I would realize when we would be traveling and the car stopped at a traffic signal and he would have tears in his eyes. So he said, that is my childhood. And then I probably started understanding. Or the time when, if I was a little rude to my maid, and he said, no, please don't, and never segregate food. I have lots of friends who always segregate food, the different for the staff. In my house, never, because we should eat the same food. So these are the little touches,
Okay, so you're going to read some question from there? No. Okay.
Do you want me to read? No. I don't think so. I'll read it later.
So, if I don't know how many in the audience have read the book, but those who have, the narrative, it spans the entire, the gamut of Indian cinema, the way it was moving, the parallel cinema, Hollywood, Bollywood, etc. So, as a journalist, when you were recording all of this, I think you are a bit disturbed, huh?
No, I'm fine.
So when you were writing, how did you view these changes which were coming over Indian cinema? The parallel cinema was getting, Arth Satya came, Shyam Benegal, Govind Nihalani. They brought their own cinema with it. And you were documenting it at that time through this biography. So what was your point of view about Indian cinema at that time?
See, Mr. Khurana mentioned the certain changes we went through the cinema. I remember because I met Omji post his, when he was already started to do a bit of commercial cinema, not really. He had just come out of those very Arda Satya and the best of Benegal and Nihalani and all. Then, of course, he went into these commercial cinemas like disco dance and all, where, obviously, he always said, it's good to get awards, but you also need to earn your bread, butter, and jam. So he was doing those films, and then, of course, those days, as he said, the single screen cinema. And I remember the switch to the multi-screen. And the films which changed along with that. And there were these, those Sujoy Ghosh's, Jhankar Beats, and those early multiplex films, which catered to the upper Indian middle class, upper class audience. Before that, the cinema was actually, the single screen cinema had taken a beating because of the VHS. And everyone was, seeing films at home. So that took a beating. But one major thing which Omji enjoyed with working with the new directors, apart from the art film directors who had a bound script, the commercial film directors never had a bound script. So they would go, and according to the hero, whoever it was, Sunny Deol or Mithun Chakravarti or whatever, they would immediately say, "Acha, ye dialogues add kar do." So much so he would go and sit on the sets, and somebody would say, Omji, ek minute, aaj ka scene ye hai aur ye dialogues hai. And then he'd say, "Ooh, bahut garam hai. It's just come out of the oven." So that was the kind. And of course, when you worked in the West, it was a completely different ball game because you had a bound script. Not just the actor or the director, even the hairdressers had. The costume department had, the makeup department, the cinematographer had, and they all had different colored stickers. So the pink one was for the makeup person. The green one was for the hairdressers. Yeah, so they knew exactly where to watch and where to look and how to go about it. That was, of course. And then, of course, they had these extra scenes. Like, if today they couldn't shoot this scene, tomorrow, and in case it rained, so they had a backup, indoor scene, which I realized during Farhan Akhtar's shoot in Dawn 1, his first Dawn. He was working at par with the Western. And then we realized that the change is happening in Indian cinema.
As far as Mr. Puri's career is concerned, how did you view? He was doing Bollywood, those South Indian films, the crossover films, UK, Pakistan, US.
Right.
So what were you thinking about his career graph? How was it moving? Very nicely? Was he very happy with the way it was happening?
Yes, fabulously, because I think Om Puri was one of the few actors who never envisioned that I want to play Gandhi and I want to make it big in the West. In fact, his English was so weak that he said, I come from a Thappar school, I have a Punjabi accent, and he's today the only Indian actor with an Order of the British Empire from Her Majesty the Queen, the only Indian actor, the only Indian actor to be honored at the Oscar Academy Awards. So the thing is, he never had those visions, unlike his contemporaries. But what happened, he moved slowly, and he moved very wisely. He did not reject Indian cinema. When the parallel cinema movement died down, he went into headlong commercial films. He did the best he could. He said, a film can never be bad. You have to give your best as an actor. And he did that. He was very passionate. But at the same time, he also went to the West. He did a lot of films in England. I mean, there were times, I think...
Very successful ones.
Yes, very successful. In fact, in England, when we used to walk down the roads or in a pub, there was a time, a British taxi fellow would say, hey, Om Puri, Or in a pub, you would have them discussing two Indian names, and one was Om Puri, the other was Shilpa Shetty, because of the big boss. So that was his popularity. Even recently, we had a festival of his last year at the Newcastle, and we had Om Puri retrospective of his British films. And there were, the Newcastle upon Tyne is a small little place, and those, the Newcastleites would come and say, who's that? Oh, Om Puri. They associated, which they wouldn't probably with any other Bollywood actor. So he took wisely, he chose wisely, he never rejected any role, because when he played a role with Jack Nicholson, it was a one scene. When he did a role with Julia Roberts and Tom Hanks, it was just 3 scenes. But he looked at the project. He said, the West is not going to pay millions and spend billions to make me look like a hero. Or when he essayed the role of Zia-ul Haq, he said, Zia-ul Haq will always be the villain, so I will take. And slowly he moved on to George Khan, East is East, where he was, the ultimate. And ironically, he played too many Pakistani roles that I do have an award when I was going through. honorary Pakistani citizen Om Puri for the maximum number of roles essayed,
Oh, God.
So that is...
So when we read the book, it comes through that he was a part of a very robust, very earthy Punjabi theatre troupe.
True.
And he honed his skills, the acting skills mostly from there. So did he ever compare his work in the theatres and how did you deal with this,
He started off at Punjab Kalamanch, moved on to NSD, where he felt that, his main acting skills came from the National School of Drama with Ibrahim Al-Qazi. Less came from your FTI. By the time he went to FTI, I was really relaxed because he was quite, comfortable and, confident as an actor. But he tried doing theatre. He started his own group called Majma, which was inaugurated the Prithvi, theatre. But he stuck to cinema. He always felt cinema, if it's a social message, cinema reached out much more than film. He's saying, if I did a Tamas, how many cities could I take the play Tamas and look at one screening and it's all over, people know, or Discovery of India, or whatever film, Sadgati, So he enjoyed cinema more. He enjoyed the stage, but he loved cinema, I think.
So this conversation cannot end unless and until I come to the manner in which you have dealt with the book, It has been extremely scathing, very, very honest. And, at times to the reader, since it's been penned down by a wife, it can, appear as being extremely harsh. So what happened? The journalist in you won. As a wife, do you think now, on hindsight, that you could have done it some other way?
It was never harsh. It's never harsh because it's only the fact that it's written by Nandita Puri.
Okay.
That is why everyone said, oh my God, the wife has written this. But imagine you're a biographer and you were to write a book on somebody. You would write everything. If you wrote by the grace of the Almighty, my husband Om Puri met with a woman who was this thing. So Omji was very clear that, if you're writing, he wanted this book to be an inspirational tale, that he wanted children to read and say that if I could make it as an actor with my physiological whatever, not only in India, and make it big in the West, with coming from a Punjabi background, Punjabi medium school and a Hindi medium school, I think anyone can. It is only you need the passion. But he was also very pragmatic. He went to NSD, he went to FTI, but he also did his graduation. And he told my son, he said, listen, beta, do what you want, but have a graduate degree. So in case it doesn't work out, you have a backup. And he always told youngsters, have a backup, always. And I think anybody would have written, he wanted it to be told properly. Anybody else would have written, it would have been fine. But because the wife wrote it. But then, I decided to write a biography. I didn't want to write a, hagiography, exactly. So that was...
You couldn't have done it any other way.
I could, I don't think I could,
Okay. So as a biographer, what do you think were the turning points in the life of the actor, personal as well as professional?
One was when he went into the National School of Drama. He ran away literally from Punjab, from his, where he was working as a munshi's clerk somewhere, and he decided to take the risk and go to this thing. The second turning point was when he came to Bombay, and he struggled for 2 years. He taught acting and movement in Roshan Taneja School, where students were Anil Kapoor and Gulshan Grover and Madan Jain and Mazhar Khan and all. Yes, he does. And then that was not a turning point. I think NSD was. The second turning point was Ardha Satya. Oh. That is like if Da Vinci has a Mona Lisa or George Orwell in Animal Farm. For Om Puri, it was Ardha Satya. And he was very wise not to take hundreds of cop roles. Then he would have been, he took different roles. He took some good cop roles. And even today, in the police academy in India, they show Ardha Satya as one of the films. This is, Mr. Ribeiro had told me this. The third, I think, was City of Joy. Was the turning point when he went to the West. He was lucky to get that role of Hasari Pal with Patrick Swayze, the two author-backed roles, but simultaneously he chose wisely, he chose good projects. And the third, of course, fourth, I would say East is East.
Yeah.
You know, because that is established him as a proper, people thought he was a British citizen, you know, because 8-10 months we stayed in UK, in London. So I think East is one of the most important. These are the 4 turning points, I would say.
So you're keeping his work alive through a foundation of yours, I understand. Yeah.
So we've started the Om Puri Foundation in 2017 at the Cannes Film Festival. At the British Pavilion, we launched it. And then we launched at the Indian Pavilion because he was also the chairman of NFDC. And the idea of the foundation is he has done over 300 films. Films, television, everything together. So the idea is to keep his legacy alive through films like Bharat Ek Khoj. Then we have something called the Susman story, which Shyam Benegal has directed Susman. It's about the weaver. And Omji went, like during City of Joy, he rode a rickshaw on the streets bare feet to get the feel of a rickshaw puller. In Susman, he stayed with the master weaver and he wove 20 meters of cloth. And he gave it to Shyam and Govind. And in fact, the wedding shirt he wore was woven by him. So we take this Susman story around, we show the film, and we tell them to improve the lot. And I've also instituted various awards. One is, he was very close to the farmers. So I've instituted the Om Puri Kisan Award. I think we gave at the Khajuraho International Film Festival to a farmer's child in Bundelkhand. We've introduced the Om Puri Karigar Award for the craftsmen and weavers' children. And 2 very important was the Om Puri Scholar at the FTI, which is for a deserving student. Not necessarily a poor and a bad student or a very rich and a good student. The most deserving, which Mr. Puri was. And the Om Puri Fellowship at the National School of Drama.
And finally, you're ready with your next book.
Yes, kind of. It is called Jennifer, and it's on international child trafficking and intercountry adoption based on a true story. So I've been working on it for 4 or 5 years, so it's coming out in February.
Thank you so much, Nandita. Thank you. That was a very informative talk. Thank you so much, audience.